Reflections from Torch Trust, focusing on Christian faith and sight loss.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Reflections, the show from Torch Trust that explores faith and disability in today's world. I'm your host, Marilyn Baker, and if you enjoy audiobooks, you're in for a treat in today's programme. We'll be hearing from Samuel Wilkins, one of Torch's volunteers, who edits and narrates audiobooks for Torch. I don't know about you, but I love settling down with a good audiobook. There's something very special about hearing a story brought to life through great narration, and when the book is especially gripping, I can listen for hours. But as effortless as an audiobook may sound, there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes. Here at Torch, we have an extensive library of Christian audiobooks, many of which are narrated by volunteers. And with Volunteer Week beginning tomorrow, we thought it would be a great opportunity to hear from one of them. Samuel Wilkins is completely blind from birth and volunteers with Torch as both an audio editor and narrator. Here he is in conversation with producer Lynn Davies.
Samuel, can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and how you came to be involved with Torch?
Well, I grew up in a Christian family, and I became a Christian when I was in my teens. Well, properly became a Christian when I was in my teens. And I had the experience that you often get of a child becoming interested in faith, moving away, then coming back, got baptized in 18. And I took a degree in live and studio sound at Southampton Solent University. And I originally wanted to do music production, but I had to move on to audiobooks because I realized that was my forte. And because my brother had been on one of the Torch Trust's holidays and has used their resources, he told me about them. And so I got in contact with them because I'd like to get experience in audiobooks. Well, I wanted to at that time, and I still do. And so I got in touch and I managed to get to the Torch Trust headquarters and spent a couple of days there experiencing what the audio production schedule was like. And so I moved into editing audiobooks, and I edited a few books for the Torch Trust. And then I recorded one with my brother who has Braille dyslexia, and he was reading and I was directing. And then I recorded a book for the Torch Trust, and I then had to, while I was recording my second one, which I'm doing now, I've had to postpone it because my microphone had broke, and so I had to send it off to repair.
I understand that you are blind yourself.
Yes.
Can you describe what level of vision do you have? Were you born blind or did you lose your sight?
I was born blind, and I'm completely blind. So I've never been able to see at all.
And how has that been in terms of working with audiobooks? Because I've heard so many different things about blind people working with audiobooks. I've heard everything from, it's really difficult because you really need to be able to see to edit very well. And then I've heard that, this is the perfect job for blind people. So yeah, if you could explain a little bit sort of how it is, how is your workflow?
I've been trying to work in the professional industry, and it really is a bit of a mixed bag because people have kept saying, why don't you try the RNIB? But the answer to that is, I have. They've said no. But I think we have to remember that the RNIB is very small, their audiobook department is, that is, compared to some of the bigger publishers. And also they hire out their studios to commercial publishers. And so it can be a bit of a difficulty because they need to be able to meet contractual deadlines, and they can't say to a publisher, a blind person is going to take longer, so you need to extend the deadline, because they may not be able to, because as you know, the book is often released at the same time as the audiobook. That's standard practice now. But I've noticed that the bigger publishers, such as Penguin, they are very good. There are limits as to what they can do, but they have done what they can. For example, they have allowed me to come in to experience an audiobook director doing his work, or as we call them, producers. And they've even allowed me to do a role reversal where I do the directing and the director does the reading. And when you're doing audiobook editing, it can be difficult because you do have to cope with the linear angle of Braille, because I use a Braille sense when reading. And doing it linearly can mean you sometimes miss bits because you might miss, for example, steps instead of stepped because your hands just skip over it. And you also have the issue of having to listen through to look for mouth noises and tongue clicks, which you can see on the screen, but we can't.
Of
But I
course.
have found a way around that, which is to use RX on the Mac, and then I process the audio with its mouth declicker, save the processed version as a different file, open a new file, put the unprocessed version on one side of the stereo field and the processed version on the other, so I can hear where the clicks are. And if there is an artifact on the processed version that there isn't on the unprocessed version, all I have to do is select that bit and swap the channels. The speed is always going to be a problem because
Yeah.
no matter what you use, it's going to take longer. So at the moment, it looks like you're going to have to, if you're going to do editing or reading, you will need to go for stuff with longer deadlines simply because under the Equality Act, they can objectively justify using a sighted person if the deadline is legally enforceable. But having said that, if you're doing narration, you could try arguing, especially with the bigger publishers, that celebrity readers get what you might call reasonable adjustments. So that sets a precedent.
And speaking of narration, how do you narrate audiobooks yourself?
Nowadays, unless you're working with one of the big five publishers, it's self-directed. So you have to do it all yourself. But what I found is I found a technique that works for me. I use the punch and roll method where, just like you used to do with a cassette machine, when you make a mistake, you go back and you press play. It plays the last few seconds. Then you press record and start again, or do it as an auto record. That way, it means you're not editing out all your fluffs and all the outtakes. But what I found is with Braille, because you're doing it linearly, you're going to have a lot more stumbling than you are with sighted people. And what I've decided my technique is, or what I found my technique is, that if I read a paragraph in my head and then record that paragraph and edit out any stumblings, then I can go back to the next paragraph and start recording from there as well. So you read it in your head, read it out loud, edit out stumbling, read it in your head, read out loud, etc.
So it sounds like a quite a cognitively heavy process, but is it satisfying? Do you find that when you've done it, how do you feel?
At the end of the book, then yes, but remember, I don't just wing it. I do a lot of prep work first. I
Of course,
read
yeah.
the book beforehand, and I do something which a lot of people might find picky. I look up the pronunciations.
I think that's really important, especially if you have foreign names or if you're reading Christian books, for example. I mean, I'm Norwegian, so there are biblical names that I would pronounce very differently to an English person.
It is. In fact, I was working on a torch book where the reader, he was talking about a car and it was a Nissan Qashqai, but he'd said it as Nissan Qashqai. And the thing is, you don't know who owns that sort of car because even a blind person might have that car, even if they don't drive it, or they may know someone with that car, and that mispronunciation will be the only thing they remember. So the most important things to pronounce are proper nouns. So that includes people's names, place names, and company and brand names. And you need to even look at how different places are pronounced differently in different places. For example, if you have Bolivar, Missouri, it's not Bolivar as it would be in Venezuela. It's Bolivar. Or Athens, Kentucky, isn't Athens, it's Athens.
Oh, really? Okay. Interesting. Is there anything else that you do before
Well,
you start reading a book?
well, I also make notes. If there are characters in the books, I make notes on them and I mark up when who's going to speak if there aren't attributions. So I might say John, and then the line if there are no attribution, because it's very easy otherwise to just skip over and say the name in the wrong voice or say the character in the wrong voice. I also write how the line's spoken. So I might write whispered beforehand.
That's really handy actually, because that's also something that I've thought of when I read something and then you read a sentence and then you realize that the person is whispering it. Because I don't know about you, but if I ever read a book in Braille in my head, I still make the voices and accents and everything come to life. And if I don't know that they whispered it, then I have to kind of reread the sentence to hear it in my head as a whisper. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, that does happen. Sometimes you think you know what it is, but then you read it out loud and you realize, oh, no, it's not. But I would also recommend, if you're going into the commercial industry for narration, you should try seeing if you can use a prepper to help you with pronunciations. That way, you can concentrate on prepping by reading the book, and someone else is doing the pronunciation work for you. And often, it's not just about whether you can do it technically, it's about whether you have the stamina. Sean Pratt, a very famous narrator, suggested if you want to see if you have the stamina, go into a closed room, such as a bathroom or a wardrobe, close the door, get out a book, and read aloud straight for 2 hours every day for 2 weeks. And I also have some mouth maintenance um, equipment in my booth. I use a thermal mug with water that has lemon, honey, and ginger in it. And I also use peppermint lip balm because that softens the P and B sounds and reduces mouth noises, and a mouth moisturizer spray.
Yes, because actually, you'd almost think that mouth noises are a product of having too much spit in your mouth, but it's usually the opposite, isn't it? That your mouth gets dry and then trying to overcompensate for that, and then you get more mouth noises.
Yes, and the other thing I found is that some other tips that some people use, some people use fresh pineapple, which I like to use because that means that because not only is it thirst quenching, but it also soothes the throat. Just make sure you brush your teeth after it. And I heard one audiobook narrator, he used to use a couple of drops of Tabasco sauce in a glass of water, but that's an acquired taste.
It's really interesting. Yeah, and I think it's really hard to appreciate the sort of preparations narrators actually go through to be able to be reading for us. Because obviously, when you listen to a well edited and well produced audiobook, it just sounds effortless, doesn't it?
It sounds effortless, but when you try it, you should you should hear some of the outtakes that some narrators do. I mean, the late William Roberts, his outtakes were legendary. He would swear at himself, he'd punch his fist into his hand, and he even knocked his own glasses off.
So, in terms of the book that you have done for Torch, can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Well, I was doing the second part of the greatest story ever told, and it was the Bear Grylls book, and I was playing the part of Thomas, or Theon, as he was called. And for that one, because it was multicast, I didn't hear what the others were doing. But what I did was I looked up the pronunciations of all the Jewish names, and I even had a listen to an Israeli who had read the Jewish Bible from David Stern, I think his name was. And so that was where I got some of the pronunciations from. So instead of Jesus, it was Yeshua. And I made Thomas. I made him sound a bit like this because, being a skeptic, he sounded to be the most intelligent, or perhaps not quite the most intelligent, but the most educated.
I see, I see. I love the private school accent.
Well, the editor thought I sounded like Noel Card.
So, in terms of audio equipment and recording for best quality, what do you use? Do you have a booth, or you did mention your booth before, but what do you do to sound as good as you possibly can?
Well, because I don't have the sighted support to build a booth or to set up a commercial one, what I've done is I use what you might call a child's duvet fort, which is it's duvets over the top of some clothes rails held together by big metal pegs and some cable ties. And that reduces the amount of echo in the spare room where I record. It's not excellent for sound insulation. I could still get the sound of a motorbike going past, even though it's at the back of the house, but that's what I have to deal with. And for recording, I use a Zoom H4e recorder that doubles as an audio interface that links to my Mac with Reaper.
Yeah, and Reaper, for listeners who don't know, is an editing program which is fully accessible when you are completely blind, and it can also be trialed for free and bought for quite a cheap price.
Well, it's
Yeah.
accessible with an add-on, that is.
Yes. Yeah, the
The
Osara
Osara add-on.
software, and but that all of that is open source, and also there's a huge international Reaper community as well, which is very helpful.
Because Goldwave can be a bit easier sometimes to edit in, I use that for my final edit, and that's also a good way of checking to see if there are any pickups that are needed. And that's where I have to read a bit again. For example, I've missed a word, or I've missed a sentence, or if I've got a sentence wrong and not noticed. Because there are going to be times when even sighted people can actually can get it wrong. I remember editing one Torch Trust book where the narrator missed out a word which completely changed the meaning of the sentence.
I see.
The sentence was, sin is not junk food, where you have to be careful how much you have, but it's fine as an occasional treat. But the guy had missed out the word where. So it came out as, sin is not junk food. You have to be careful how much you have, but it's fine as an occasional treat.
Yeah, no, that really rather changes the meaning of it, doesn't it? If somebody who is listening feel like they're a budding audiobook editor or narrator, how do you think they should go about it? And I guess this can be extended to whether they're sighted or whether they're blind, but also specifically maybe some advice for blind audiobook enthusiasts who want to get into the production and editing of them.
Be prepared for a lot of rejections. And also, I would suggest network as much as you can. You should use resources such as LinkedIn, and also see if you can get in contact with narrators who can tell you about publishers they've used. When it comes to editing, as I said, you might find that because it will take longer, look for projects with longer deadlines. Because let's be honest, although it's a more maybe considered a more pure form of editing when you are using sound, sighted people can just use waveforms, and that's a lot quicker. So you need to look for stuff that will have a longer deadline and people who will be willing to make reasonable adjustments. And one thing I should make it very clear, people are not trying to discriminate against blind people deliberately. A lot of times they want to help you, but their hands are tied. Even CEOs aren't the ultimate decision makers. If you're wanting to get equipment and get stuff that will allow you to do narration properly, it's always good to, as I said before, network, because if you can find voiceover artists who are near you or willing to travel to you, they will be happy to help you set up equipment.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, did you have someone helping you set it up, or did you do most of it yourself?
Well, I had someone help me set up the booth, and with Reaper, I was able to do most of it myself. What I am trying to do at the moment is get into the directing side because I think that is the one area where I think I could really thrive because when you're doing that, you're not actually doing the reading, and it means that you can actually read along with the person. And although it involves prep, it's not the same sort of intensity as the prep you do when you're reading, because you're not marking up sentences, but you still need to look up pronunciations. But directing is the area I'm really looking to getting into.
Thanks, Samuel, for talking to us. And it's been really eye-opening to hear about your process, that it actually can be done as a blind person, and also all the preparation that the narrators have to go through. I will remember the Tabasco in the water glass.
Only if you like it.
I don't know about you, but I learned a lot from hearing Samuel talking about audio production, and it was especially interesting to hear his perspective as someone who is blind. If you'd like to hear his narration of the character Thomas in The Greatest Story Ever Told by Bear Grylls, you can order it using the details at the end of the programme. Whether we're sighted or blind, bringing words to life takes preparation and care. But for blind readers, there can be the added challenge of working with Braille, which is such a linear format, and Samuel clearly takes great pride in making sure his work is the very best it can be. I use a Braille note taker, Braille Sense actually, when I do my scripts for this programme. It's the easiest way for me, as I don't want paper rustling, do I? And also, I love editing. I have to do quite a lot of that because I do make mistakes, and I've worked a lot in studios over the years. And I have to wear headphones these days because I'm losing a bit of hearing, and it helps me hear all the little glitches and funny things that can go on in a recording. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but we'll be back next week with more stories and reflections. If volunteering for Torch is something you'd like to explore, or if you'd like to find out more about the ways Torch can support you, our client services team would be very happy to hear from you. You can call us on 01858 438 260. That's 01858 438 260. Or you can email info@torchtrust.org. We're also on social media. Just search for Torch Trust on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. So from me, Marilyn, and the Reflections team, goodbye and God bless.
You've been listening to Reflections from Torch Trust.